What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. Okay, so picking up with the epilogue to Spider Island, this is actually really kind of cool. The whole basis, from what I could tell anyway, the whole basis behind Spider Island was really kind of like what the early bit of Dan Slott's run was leading up to, in the sense that it was this idea that Dan Slott looked around and said, there's a lot of things in the Spider-Man mythos that I don't really care for, that was done by a committee. Because remember, when Dan Slott first became part of this writing committee after the events of One More Day, it was everybody's going to be part and parcel to this. You know, there's a lot of fingers in this story that's being told. It wasn't just Dan Slott doing what Dan Slott wanted to do, but having the ability to take over the title on his own and do whatever it is that he wanted to do granted him the opportunity to say, okay, let's just clear out all the stuff that I don't like. Let's get rid of all the things I don't want to have in the Spider-Man mythos. Let's rectify all this stuff. And that's exactly what happens here. But it also sends out some threads for future stories that will come later on down the line, specifically Superior Spider-Man. So what we do is we basically just kind of pick up with the aftermath. I mean, this story is called Naked City, and it's kind of funny here. I mean, it's all these different superheroes in the Marvel universe who were all giant spiders, you know, during the events of Spider Island. And it's kind of funny here, you know, because it's like everybody's kind of recovering and everybody's shocked that they were naked. The only person who doesn't care is Hercules, and Hercules is like, yes, look upon my visage with envious eyes, male superheroes. It's it's really kind of this funny situation. That's one of the things that I love so much about his character, because he's just kind of like, I'm in my natural form, like I am Hercules, you know, I am the god of strength. They don't call me a giant for no reason. And it's in all seriousness, it's just one of these funny little things. Again, it's just kind of, it's really just cleanup. You know, it's cleaning things up, getting things sorted out, getting things back in order. And so the idea here is that we pick up with Mary Jane Watson and Peter Parker. And this is one of the things that's kind of cool, because Dan Slott sort of takes this moment between the two of them. And it's not really Dan Slott saying, hey, we're going to get them back together again. It's Dan Slott saying, hey, these two share a connection that no one else really shares. And that's true. You know, even within the Spider-Man mythos, that's true. You know, the fact that they dated for so long, she was one of the first people to know about his secret identity, so on and so forth. But outside of the comic, we as the reader look at that, and it's like, even if they're only really good friends, for us as the reader, for people who followed Spider-Man, there's a connection between the two of them that no one else has. The stories that have been written about Mary Jane Watson, about Peter Parker, have had their ups and downs. They've been married, they broke up, their marriage was nullified by Mephisto. There's all kinds of things that go on with their story. And so a lot of people look at that and say, look at the legacy that was forged between these two. And it's really Dan Slott kind of pointing at that. It's Dan Slott saying, hey, they're sharing a rooftop moment, and it represents everything that they've been through up to this point. The other half of this is that in the middle of the conversation, Peter Parker just basically has to bail out because, you know, Aunt May's grabbing his attention when she and J. Jonah Jameson Sr. are finally making their way off to Boston, officially leaving New York after the events of Spider Island. And this is when we learn that Mary Jane Watson retained her spider powers. And so it was really kind of cool, you know, to ask the question, what kind of stories are we going to see? But again, this whole idea of anti-venom, you know, for example, the idea that Eddie Brock was looking for atonement for his past acts when he was a villain comes to fruition when Reed Richards pops up on TV. Now, again, keep in mind, when it comes to the Marvel landscape, Reed Richards, how he's viewed within Marvel Comics is how he's viewed outside of Marvel Comics. Within the Marvel Comics universe, it's like Reed Richards, one of the smartest men in the world. Everybody respects him. He's an explorer. The superheroes love him. When it comes to us as readers outside of comics, it's like the Fantastic Four, the first family of Marvel. The Fantastic Four set the groundwork for the Avengers, Force Works, all these different teams that would come later on down the line. You know, Guardians of the Galaxy, they were the template behind that, the legacy characters. And so when Reed Richards shows up on TV and says New York was saved because of the actions of Eddie Brock, well, then Eddie Brock's a good guy now, and there's no arguing that point. It's just the way it is. And it's really cool, because that's the kind of respect that Reed Richards commands from people in New York, from the superhero community, so on and so forth. But again, it's just kind of wrapping up a few loose ends here, you know, in the sense that J. Jonah Jameson's having a drink with Robbie Robertson. Again, they're kind of on different terms here in terms of, you know, J. Jonah Jameson being mayor of New York, Robbie Robertson running Frontline now. But it's also this idea that J. Jonah Jameson still doesn't seem to want to give up the notion that Peter Parker, that Spider-Man saved the city. He kind of wants to hang on to his anger, hang on to his hatred for all this. And at the end of the day, Robbie Robertson says, dude, you've got to give Spider-Man a break. You know, he was basically the key to saving the city. He's one of the people that helped save the entirety of the city. And so in the end, you know, J. Jonah Jameson's like, fine, I'll give him a break. You know, I'll cut him a break. I'll make a call and we'll see what happens. You know, we have Peter Parker helping some guys on the bridge, you know, get things cleared up, you know, get things cleared out. It's just kind of this cool cool little moment. The problem is that after Peter's done saying his goodbyes to Aunt May, after she and J. Jonah Jameson leave for Boston, he gets back home to the apartment with Carly Cooper. And this is really where Dan Slott begins to sort of wrap things up between the two, because Carly Cooper's breaking up with him. Now, this is when I said it was important that we had to keep in mind the whole idea of Peter Parker going on TV and saying, I'm Spider-Man, during the events of Spider Island, because Carly Cooper has figured out his secret identity. And that was not supposed to happen. Remember, it's almost like those, it's almost like the Harry Potter universe, right? When those wizards and stuff cast those spells, somebody walks up to something they're not supposed to walk up to, and then suddenly they remember they're supposed to go do something else. The spell is much like that Doctor Strange cast, in the sense that unless Peter Parker went to Carly Cooper and said, took off his mask and said, hey, look, I'm Spider-Man, or revealed his identity to her individually, or she just walked up on him while he was changing into his Spider-Man costume, she's not supposed to know. No one is supposed to know, but she knows. And what she says is, I'm a forensic scientist. My job is to put the pieces together. And what she says is, when Spider Island happened and I was gaining my spider powers for the first time and everybody in the city was gaining their spider powers for the first time, you were the only one that knew exactly how to use them. You were the only one that slid right into the role and knew it perfect. And she even goes back, if you guys remember, with volume 1 in Big Time, she goes back and says, when we were hanging out and I was showing you how to roller skate and you didn't know how to roller skate and you were trying to figure it out, she was like, that's what you should have done when you were tricking me. And that's the biggest issue for her, is not that Peter Parker's Spider-Man. It's the fact that he lied to her. With Carly Cooper, her family's mired in deceit. Her family's mired in people keeping their own secrets. With her going to Peter Parker when they first started getting together, her whole thing was, you better know what you're doing and you better not lie. And Peter Parker lied to her, duped her about his identity. Now, granted, this was done by Peter for the safety of all. I mean, that was something that was established during the events of Civil War. That was the whole crux. When Peter Parker went on stage during the events of Civil War and said, hey, everybody, my name is Peter Parker. I'm revealing my identity because I trust Iron Man when he says superheroes who come forward and register with S.H.I.E.L.D. will not have to worry about their families being put in danger. That was exactly what happened. As soon as Peter Parker revealed his identity, he walked out. People tried to attack him. They tried to attack Aunt May. They tried to attack Mary Jane Watson. And so in response to this, when Civil War was over, when it was all said and done, after the events of One More Day and all that kind of good stuff, when Peter Parker went to Doctor Strange, in the post-Civil War landscape and said, I want to make sure no one knows what my identity is, Doctor Strange cast a spell, and it was done to make sure that if Peter Parker, for some reason, his identity was dumped out, that he wouldn't have to worry about that. He wouldn't have to worry about people figuring out who he is. He wouldn't have to worry about his friends and family being put in danger. The issue with all this is that for Carly Cooper, it doesn't resonate. She just doesn't grasp it. At the end of the day, she's just like, you lied to me. And so ultimately she says, we're done. We're over with. Now, what follows this is actually kind of weak, to be honest. It's actually kind of a weak way to do this. What Doctor Strange, when Peter Parker goes to Doctor Strange and says, why did she know my secret identity? No one was supposed to know. What in the heck happened? Doctor Strange says, when you went on TV and told people, I'm Peter Parker, I have spider powers, you basically told everybody you were Spider-Man. You undid the spell, or at least didn't really undo it, but make it weaker, make it possible for people to know who he was. It's not like he was wearing a Spider-Man mask and went on TV like he did during Civil War, take his mask off and say, I'm Spider-Man, but it was almost the same thing. And because of that, it weakened the spell to a degree, and people can start figuring out his identity. Now, this was basically Dan Slott coming back and saying, okay, let's get things sorted out. Let's make things reasonable. Let's set this for the purpose of making Spider-Man stories a little more dangerous, because that was always kind of an intrinsic value of Peter Parker stories. Someone somewhere may figure out his identity, and if they do, what happens? Like, that was always kind of the basis behind it. So it was basically beefing up the number of people in his rogues gallery who could know who he is, taking it beyond Jackal, getting into all these different individuals and setting the stage for Superior Spider-Man. And so what we end up doing is we sort of transition to this last little bit of a send-off with Madam Web. Again, Julia Carpenter, Madam Web being able to see the future and so on. She really just kind of sits down with Peter and she says, look, what you are given here is a chance to basically start over. You were given, or you had this last little vial of the cure from Max Modell. If you take this, it will cure you of your spider powers. You will no longer be Spider-Man. You will be Peter Parker, and you will be able to live a regular life. She says the web of life and destiny chooses avatars for the totems. You're Spider-Man because the web of life and destiny chose you to be Spider-Man. If you walk away, someone else can take your place. It could be Ben Reilly, it could be Kane Parker, it could be any number of people, it could be a random guy off the street. It's her basically saying you have an out, you have a chance to walk away. This is Dan Slott toying with the notion that Peter Parker might not be Spider-Man anymore. But in the end, He says no. He says, I'm going to stay Spider-Man. I'm going to be Spider-Man. Of course, we would have a hard time envisioning a scenario where Peter Parker was never Spider-Man again. I have a hard time imagining a situation where Marvel would release a story where Peter Parker, in the main Marvel universe, where it's like Peter Parker is never going to be Spider-Man again. Like, his is going to be somebody else. Like, they kill off Peter Parker and replace him with Miles Morales. That'll never happen. It's like eliminating Superman and having him gone forever and never bringing him back. In the end, Peter Parker's a legacy character. He's so significant to the success of Marvel Comics and one of their best-selling titles. If that happened, they'd be on the verge of destroying their entire comic book line just because of one individual person. It's a bold statement, but it's a statement that I think is actually pretty accurate here. And so in the end, we pick up with Mary Jane Watson, and this is kind of the cool thing, is because Peter's also learning that Mary Jane still has her powers to a degree, but it's also kind of reconciling these two things. And even then, he sits down and he talks with Mary Jane about how Peter, how he and Carly have basically broken up. Now again, Dan Slott's kind of toying here. He's like, well, maybe will they get together? Won't they get together? And we're really not given an answer here. We're really not given an answer on whether or not the two of them will end up getting back together again. Instead, the conversation kind of deviates towards the idea that Peter Parker feels like, well, his actions will just go unnoticed. That'll just be another instance of Peter saving the city, and no one will really care that much. But Mary Jane Watson says, no, the Empire State Building has been lit up in celebration of you, your colors. It's the city of New York saying thank you. It's the city of New York basically saying thank you, Spider-Man, for saving our city, for keeping us alive. And it's cool. It's a really great way, because what this does is basically wrap up like the first half of Dan Slott's run, the first part of Dan Slott's run. It's him clearing all that stuff out and saying, okay guys, now we basically get to start over again. Now we officially get into what it is that I wanted to do. Now we officially get into everything leading up into Superior Spider-Man, going into Spiderverse, going into all new, all different, amazing Spider-Man, all that kind of good stuff. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you're new here to Comics Explained, make sure you hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.